Alright, strap in, we're doing Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is a whole lot of things, probably too many things. According to a 7-year-old I know, he's a dog, a snack, a fictional character, a famous person, a movie star, and brown with spots. In a word, he's ubiquitous. My 7-year-old friend didn't quite catch that one, but he understood in spirit. That's the thing about Scooby-Doo as a franchise, it really is ubiquitous, right? It kinda has to be at this point. I don't know too many corners of the pop culture padded cell which shroud themselves from the light of the world's oldest, most famous Great Dane and his lovable human pets. I think it's arguable that after 53 years and nary a hiatus, Scooby and the gang have kind of evolved past being characters, and not in the way that the disease tropes of long-runner media like flanderization might usually dictate. Similarly, I don't think there's such a thing as a quintessential Scooby-Doo show anymore, at least as far as quintessential extends beyond 4 kids, a dog, and a mystery to solve. It depends on a lot. How old are you? What's your preferred medium? Man in a mask or real monsters? It's more of a pick-your-flavor type situation, and I think that, more than anything, the ubiquity of Scooby-Doo shifts the entire setup closer to something more akin to an archetype. It's become a fully realized template on which to build different kinds of media. There's no real way of going wrong, you know? Scooby and Kiss team-up movie in the year 2015? Fuck it, why not? You want monsters and gorgeously fluid Japanese animation from Studio Moog? We got that too. Are you a Daphne supremacist who hates Fred and Velma but also loves Scrappy-Doo and Scooby-Dum? Got you covered. Are you a Zoomer who hates mysteries and voice acting, but who also loves cinematic universes and superhero franchise crossover cash grabs? Wow, there really is something for everybody. The point I'm making is that a Scooby-shaped hole in the wall probably more closely resembles a circle than a Great Dane at this point. And the point I'm making is that most Scooby media these days is defined by how it gets adapted rather than the specifics of what it chooses to adapt. The point I'm making is that the James Gunn penned, Raja Gosnell directed 2002 live-action movie is a really weird and kind of dope Scooby-Doo adaptation. So join me and my 31-year-old mental health death spiral as we try to solve the mystery of Scooby-Doo and the spirit of adaptation. Just be grateful it's not the Chipmunks yet. Clue number 1. Scooby Who. Adaptation's a weird thing, right? Like, it's this set of crazy detail-oriented exercises in decision-making, and that same attention to detail has to cascade down through every single decision being made. It's a juggling act featuring conflicting authorial intent, audience perception, shifting demographics, decades of historical significance, and the ever-changing tide in the ripples and wake of evolving cultural priorities. And you have to write it. Anyway, the James Gunn penned Scooby-Doo is an adaptation of the classic Hanna-Barbera cartoon, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, and also bits of the new Scooby-Doo show. And it's got elements of the new Scooby-Doo movies, and characters from the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show, settings from a pup named Scooby-Doo, some holdover traits from What's New Scooby-Doo, and well, yeah, it's an adaptation. The greatest contentions in adapting classic franchises to the silver screen are usually found surrounding the spirit of the adaptation, so to speak. Does it feel like the source material, you know? Most audience members grant grace to artistic license enough to expand the palette of a given work so long as they feel the roots are intact. But that caveat also often acts as an immovable line in the sand. That's why something like The Last Airbender fails so miserably and utterly, despite being a pretty one-to-one adaptation of the source material's story. You can have the characters do the things and say the words in the places that they did in the show, but no audience would ever be stupid enough to accept that movie as a surrogate of the property at large, because it doesn't carry the things with it that made the original great. The spirit, the tone, the sense of reciprocal reverence between author and audience. It's hollow, and the audience can hear every echo reverberating inside the shell. Gunn's Scooby-Doo, on the other hand, has a completely original story, characters, setting, and plot, and fares far, far better than most live-action adaptations of animated properties, full stop. It isn't trying to be this all-encompassing, grand-scale, perfectly concocted distillation of all things Scooby. Instead, it's asking a question. Scooby-Doo, who are you? The answer to that question is a lot of different things to different people, James Gunn and Raja Gosnell included. The first movie's answer to this question is one I think I like a fair amount. It isn't so much concerned with proving definitively who Scooby-Doo and Mystery Inc. are, either figuratively or literally, but is concerned instead with inviting the audience to answer that question along with them, and using the Scooby template to make something that's familiar, fresh, and generalized in such a way that it embraces and uses the ubiquity of its source as a tool rather than a crutch. It's a thin line separating that kind of utility and then expanding outward so as to maintain the same level of accessibility, which actually wasn't always the case. Famously, the first Scooby-Doo movie received an R rating from the MPAA due to a misinterpreted joke, and Gunn himself has stated that he was writing an edgier script for a PG-13 audience, targeting older kids and adults. This cut was then edited down further after test screenings to receive its PG rating, and it's a hard PG, fitting more comfortably alongside something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit as opposed to, say, Sonic the Hedgehog. It also resulted in the truly criminal cutting of Linda Cardellini singing I Love You Baby to Fred and Daphne as Velma. Ironically, this specific cut also removes the only line which established Velma's drink as non-alcoholic. As it turns out, understanding the movie through that lens is actually super useful in understanding how the movie operates on the whole, beginning with the intro scene. The intro scene ticks all the right boxes. We get to watch as not only are the dynamics of each character established with aplomb, a testament to the series' excellent casting given its intention, but are also left with a great hook, which both exacerbates what's been given to the audience and leaves space for intrigue about how it's all going to come together. It tells us a lot about where the creators are coming from in relation to the template. How do James Gunn and Raja Gosnell illustrate the dynamics of Scooby-Doo? Well, they exaggerate. Daphne's been captured, as usual. Velma hatches a plan and asks Fred to remember it. Fred answers in the affirmative, but is more interested in himself than the gang at large. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby are introduced in tandem, which is par for the course, and are established as mutual scaredy cats and best friends who play off each other's strengths to overcome their individual adversities, if only through the countenance of cumulative luck, and each with a tendency to get in the other's way. These individual expressions of character come to a head, precluded by the reveal of the Luna ghost, and made evident in its aftermath. We watch everything we've just established about the characters play out in climax. Velma calls out Fred for taking credit for her plan. Daphne gets chastised for being captured. Fred takes the opportunity to stroke his own ego, and Shaggy and Scooby get left in the cold despite trying to keep everyone together. Everyone's aware of the template, and everyone's decided that it doesn't work. Well, almost everyone. There's a clever moment that comes from Shaggy explaining the dynamics of the group. He says the gang's like banana split and lists a bunch of disgusting foods that don't go together at all. Velma, the smart one, recognizes the unintentional wisdom in Shaggy's fucked up analogy and tells him that he's right and promptly leaves the group.
You really put it in perspective for me. I quit.
Cascading into the full dissolution of Mystery Inc. What's most interesting to me here is how the characters are self-aware enough to not only each acknowledge their roles and molds in the wider Scooby canon, but also to call out the flaws attached to them, and ultimately, to decide that these roles don't define them. If the gang itself is lost sight of and called into question the dynamics that make them the gang in the first place, how is it that they, we, and Gunn come to recognize the newest shape of Mystery Inc.? Clue number 2. Driving the Mystery Machine. One of the more enticing things about the ubiquity of Scooby-Doo and Gunn's restructuring of Mystery Inc. is that this restructure serves as its own engaging mystery given the upended expectations following the gang's breakup. It is, for the movie, in Shaggy terms, the chocolate drizzle on a double-decker sandwich, coating everything and commonizing the disparate foundational ingredients, which in turn serve to form the object on which to slather anything at all. It may seem a little basic, but the parallel of these upended expectations form the basis of the movie's ability to explore multiple mysteries in tandem. The movie picks up 2 years after the dissolution of Mystery Inc., and it's here that, similarly to Monteveri's ambassador from Spooky Island, Gunn invites the audience to become an active participant in the mystery again. What's masterful here is that, through the restructuring of the foundation of the gang, Gunn's able to give the characters, and the audience, all the components to piece the idea together in different ways from the very beginning. The evidence is more circumstantial than linear, and that's the movie's benefit overall, more evocative of how the pieces fit together in a movie like Clue rather than something like Memento. Every character gets their own piece to play with. Daphne has studied self-defense and martial arts. Fred wrote a book called
Fred on Fred, the many faces of me.
Velma's working for NASA while on a journey of self-discovery. Shaggy and Scooby, similarly to their role in the gang's breakup, remain relatively static and operate as both anchor and dangling shoe for the audience. They remain a vestige of the status quo while Gunn and the audience dream of how they'll factor into the shifting dynamics of this otherwise evolved group. And this is where the movie, smartly, spends most of its time. We get to see this idea play out through the gang a number of different times, each with its own set of group configurations to call home. Each of these scenes play out in a way that's fully in sync with the structure of the narrative, as well as equally committed in service to answering Gunn's questions about character. Structurally, it's a deceptively smart way to frame the movie, remaining in lockstep with the overarching vision. It's here to poke and prod in the gaps between photography and painting on celluloid. Aside from some of the initial setup, each scene in the first act is almost exclusively dedicated to rebalancing and reintroducing the gang in this way. The approach is overflowing with merit, culminating in a scene that has the gang searching for clues throughout a spooky castle ride, a la the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, and it is outstanding. These 10 minutes, divorced of context, would be a great pilot pitch on their own. Either way, it's a transparently loving recreation. The sequence kicks off with the real shown their work moment between Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby. It's a fun initial configuration to explore, and it generously serves double duty as a subtle hint toward the true nature of the case to the well-initiated, reuniting the primary cast of 1983's The New Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show, with one glaring omission. It's also really cool to watch the animators set their nose to the grindstone as Scooby is fucking hilarious when he pantomimes, especially around Shaggy and Daphne. It's a small moment, but it's really great, playing off of expectation and adding in character work. There's an early indicator for Shaggy and Scooby's arc when Scooby kicks Shaggy. They're in each other's way. There's a nod in there for Daphne too, asking Scooby if he'll be fearless.
And you'll be fearless?
Like she's trying to be. It's also legitimately impressive that all of this is communicated so clearly in exactly 1 minute, and it's a testament to the results of a great script, cast, and the exceptional artists behind them. The real configuration experiments start for the gang after Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby make it inside and meet Velma and Fred, each having made it there independently. The gang decides to split up,
Typical.
and Gunn once again calls direct attention to the makeup of the group. Velma calls out Fred for always deciding who goes where, of course, and for deciding that Daphne always goes with him, of course, and so Fred comes up with a new plan on the fly, of course. He'll go with Velma, Daphne the other way, and Scooby and Shaggy will do whatever it is they do. Right here is where Gunn and Gosnell start to answer some of the fundamental questions about the Shape of Mystery Inc. to come in earnest, and doing this against the backdrop of a classic Scooby setup sharply brings the characters and template into focus. Gunn achieves this by subtly turning everything on its head for the gang, with each member trading on their piece of the puzzle to help guide the audience through his audit. It happens in short bursts, giving only what's needed, as colorfully and in spirit as possible. Velma's already asserted herself to Fred, calling out his function as arbiter of the evergreen split-up. Shaggy and Scooby venture off on their own into a room with a medieval feast and bicker a bit. Daphne has to tear a heavy beam off a door with her newfound strength. Fred explains his substance to Velma, and just as soon as everybody has their setup, the script returns to the familiar. A pair of eyes lurk behind a painting. They belong to a guy who runs to turn on the ride, previously closed for dangerous construction, and this configuration of the gang is set on its back foot. How does Gunn respond? He traps Shaggy and Scooby in the trauma wall, has Daphne taken hostage by the inanimate, forces Fred to nearly kill himself by refusing to follow Velma's plan, has Velma adjust the plan on the fly to save Fred's life, and then he slaps the big red lever as the ride grinds to a halt and tosses the gang a few clues. Daphne gets to find the Damon-ritis and takes too long to jump out of a trap, and Fred and Velma find a training video on how to be the 2000s dude James Gunn made up for this movie, which eventually turned out to be the rhetorical missing link between boomers and zoomers' conception of 2000s dudes alike. both of whom also missed the joke in the wake of Gunn's excessive and misunderstood Gen X energies, landing at the sovereign feet of yet impressionable 12-year-old millennials at the time of release. Either way, it's of its time, and either way, it's a red herring nestled inside the gang's success. Sure, they get to walk out reinvigorated by virtue of having taken a step forward, but the synchronicity of those steps is slowed and jagged when moving under the weight of their individual ambitions. The gang's moving forward and outward at the same time. This outward movement allows Gunn to answer a few more essential questions before unleashing his final vision for Mystery Inc. and Scooby-Doo onto the audience. Shaggy and Scooby have kind of been at the back of the line for the Gunn-Gosnell audit, but the chance is taken to explore them more thoroughly after Fred, Velma, and Daphne are captured. After watching their friends get picked off and taken over by literal demons due to our Nuki Beast scarcity, Shaggy and Scooby escape with Mary Jane, Shaggy's made-up girlfriend for the movie, before Scooby gets captured and Shaggy finally gets to trade in on his piece of Gunn's character Mystery. There's been a slower prelude to Shaggy and Scooby's arcs throughout the movie, as early as their first appearance. It took me a while to piece together, especially because the "friends don't quit" mantra they toss to Shaggy is kind of a vague way of framing the problems they're having and need to solve, but Gunn's on to something better than that here, even if he's unsure of how to phrase it. The very first thing we see and hear from the duo is them bickering inside a barrel before the plan falls apart. The two don't even appear whole until the end of the Luna Ghost sequence, at which point their combined efforts and fuck-ups have, at least to some degree, laid bare Gunn's plans to remake the two in his upgraded version of Mystery Inc. For Gunn, Shaggy and Scooby kind of operate at the opposite end of his Mystery Inc. puzzle. They're the only ones who actively try to preserve the template. They don't have any meta gripes about themselves when it comes to being captured, or scared, or unwitting, or any number of things Gunn might call them out for, and instead get to serve as a counterpoint to Gunn's own argument. They get to make the case for the gang, to the gang. The arguing and bickering is a garnish employed by Gunn throughout, and it's utilized to great effect, bubbling and simmering underneath, while Gunn's primary contentions get time to shine through and air themselves out between the other members of the gang. It's only once the script has had its fill in this regard that we shift focus to Shaggy and Scooby and what Gunn wants to use them to say. On the island, after the big escape from the monsters, Scooby tells Shaggy that he's, whipped. Shaggy tells Scooby that he's jealous, and the two have it out ahead of Scooby being captured in a hole. These divergent paths are the final shakeup Gunn needs to throw at the gang to exert his dominion as master of Mystery Inc.'s configuration. Shaggy's on his own, without the gang or his best pal, and so it's up to him to find them all and reassemble the group. He's got to be brave on his own. Shaggy heads down the spooky cave and is able to find the ancient demon vat holding his friend's disembodied spirit heads. He's also able to deduce that freeing the spirits will reunite them with their bodies, and enduring a rare lucid moment where he remembers to grab the Daemon-ritis too. Spurred on by near isolation, Shaggy is the only avenue left to save his friends, and friends don't quit. In these moments he's without fear, without failure, though critically, not completely without Scooby. Scooby's with him in spirit, as it were, functioning as the sole motivation for Shaggy. It's the promise of finding him and reuniting that allows him to operate in this way, especially after earlier suggesting to Daphne that they abandon Fred and Velma and let them get eaten, which is an insane thing for Shaggy to have said. Either way, the floating heads try to escape back to their bodies, and Gunn's finally left with everything he needs to flex and nut all over his audience with character as each member of the gang floats between each other's bodies, perfectly encapsulating the spirit of Gunn's mission from the start, and providing every actor the opportunity to showcase what they've learned about the gang so far. Fred gets to be a pervert, which is gross and not fun. Shaggy gets to complain about food.
Don't you ever eat?
Velma gets to hypothesize a correct outcome to the body switching, and Daphne gets the gang to the voodoo man. The gang gets to the beach with the voodoo guy Daphne met, and since he holds the exposition beast, he gets to tell the rest of the plot to the gang and the audience. Ancient ritual, pure spirit, rescue Scooby or 10,000 years more exposition. The gang takes the opportunity to come together, United and newly suited to the movie's vision, each member of the gang trading in their piece of the mystery for a seat in the gun machine. It roars and whirs to life, sputtering with excitement and reinvigoration. It screeches out of the scrap heap, debris flung and flying into the air behind it, hauls absolute ass with just enough time to pick up Scooby, chuck him inside, and make it to Coolsville, all before even considering. Clue number 3. The Scrappy Mechanic. Okay, holy shit, that was a long section. Let's take a step back. I just spent like 2,000 words rightfully lauding James Gunn as a screenwriter, and for damn good reason. His conception of the gang and how they fit together works, and it works really well. But no movie's perfect, besides the Scooby movie I've yet to make, right? Any troper worth their salt recognizes the Scrappy. Something, it's an idea as ubiquitous as the other dog. Shorthand to mean things people hate, the Scrappy is fittingly named after, well, Scrappy-Doo. I don't know that I'd levy hatred at anything in this movie I don't like, but Gunn likes to poke and prod, and I like to complain. So here's where we get to take a gander at some of the Scrappies of Scooby-Doo. The first and biggest Scrappy of the movie for me is actually not Scrappy-Doo himself. Instead, it's the all-new giant-sized Scrappy of media history and retrospect itself. Shitty humor in the Lord's year 2002. James Gunn isn't unfamiliar with shitty humor, both the offensive and the awkward, but his uncontested Gen X energy is filtered through a PG-13 aligned Scooby-Doo parody with trauma sensibilities, paints chunks of the movie in immutable swaths of belched out yellows and embarrassing greens. Daphne definitely gets the worst of it. She's literally introduced complaining about having a wedgie and how the ghost holding her keeps grabbing her.
This ghost keeps grabbing.
Granted, the dude carrying her is a villain committing a villainous act, but when her literal love interest starts taking mental creep shots of her boobs like he's fucking Cam Jensen, and then feels her up while she complains to her closest, most closest silent friends about it,
Fred keeps touching me.
I feel a line's been crossed. If somebody wanted to be a good boy and consult the good script, maybe they'd cobble something together about how Fred's self-interest and self-centeredness are so deeply baked into Gunn's conception of him that it literally transcends his physical body. I would then remind this person that this is also the only trait Gunn has Fred overcome in the movie. They might say something like, "But that's him at his darkest right before he realizes what he needs to do in order to grow, and according to Harmon's copy of Campbell's Story Circle, maybe he's returned to the familiar, his own body having changed." To which I'd respond that this argumentative-ass person I made up is operating backwards from their initial conclusion, and that nothing about the way Daphne's treated in these instances passes the sniff test, and I'd be fucking right.
He was horny, so he dropped him. Man is evil!
Moving on to a more literal Scrappy, his inclusion here warrants closer inspection. Scrappy-Doo being the main antagonist isn't something that's ever really bothered me. I actually harbor very few ill-inspired feelings towards Scrappy overall, probably a consequence of being born in 1990. If anything, I think the movie divorces itself of his influence a little bit too much. It's a tough position to be in, but his space in the movie doesn't lend much to its metatextual slant, despite how Gunn and the script choose to treat him. I kept looking for clues that might lead me to him before the movie does, but I couldn't find anything. There's a part when Mondavarius calls for Scooby menacingly, he himself alludes to being a freaky guy in an alley, and Fred outright tells him he's a suspect.
It's mostly just because you creep me out.
All of which point to Mondavarius, and none of which point to Scrappy. This is where circumstantial versus linear evidence comes back to bite you in the ass. The movie has to compensate for this dynamic directly, and it does so by having a canonically drunk Velma reminisce about the time Scrappy pissed on Daphne and was abandoned on the side of the road, never to be heard from again, allegedly. It doesn't take a gang of teenagers with attitude to solve the mystery of why the movie introduces Scrappy here, and then carries on for another hour plus before he's ever made relevant again. If Gunn has a flaw operating in structural parallel with the movie, it's his preoccupation with character over format relative to the source. It's betrayed by the script's wishy-washy attitude toward the mystery at hand, the lack of proper tangible clues pointing toward a villain the audience can anticipate, the lackadaisical approach to when which characters are affected by different or the same sequence of events, if at all with regard to plot. It's glossed over by the movie's well-balanced employment of a certain cartoony charm, we'll get there, but is made to be a largely irrelevant undercurrent in service of character commentary through the perspective at hand. And yet it pervades. What's most disappointing in this regard is that there are easy, serviceable fixes to these issues, which are either the victim of cut content or the implications otherwise thereof. For instance, Mary Jane, Shaggy's girlfriend, is introduced with a dog allergy. She sneezes directly onto a disguised Scooby because she's allergic to dogs, specifically. This never comes back to mean anything. It's there to pay lip service to characterization, understandably so, but is an otherwise inert idea. The movie is already anemic as far as Scrappy clues are concerned, so why introduce this idea without a smidgen of crumb for the mystery deprived? Why not have Mary Jane sneeze right next to Mondavarius? You can throw them the bone and have them fall off the scent at the same time, too. Just put Mondavarius in any scene with Shaggy, Scooby, and MJ when she sneezes, and call it ambiguous. Boom! I shall call this the child of foreshadowing and plausible deniability. It has been foretold. It's precisely this lack of signaling that precludes anything Gunn could have done with the Scrappy character, beyond his inclusion as an overextended punchline. That Scrappy's used the way he is itself indicative of Gunn's more stringent character priorities, as well as some of his limitations. Another such limitation of the movie, and the grand finale of my Scrappy trilogy, is its use of music. Looking back at the previous 4,600 words, it's funny to consider that the movie's musical choices are what inspired me to write this whole thing in the first place. There are few such franchises whose identities are as expansive and inseparable from their music as Scooby-Doo is. And for all the embracing and embellishing of Scooby tropes throughout the movie, Scooby's rich history of great original and licensed tracks goes criminally ignored. Massive chunks of Scooby-Doo's ubiquity are owed to its music. 39 years worth at the time of release. Intro after intro, style after style, decades of reinterpretation thereof and thereafter. 60s rock, 70s cheese, 80s soul, 90s edge, and what does the movie utilize of it? The Scooby-Doo Where Are You theme song and literally nothing else. It's implemented all over the place too. We've got hip-hop versions, celebratory versions, sad versions, spooky versions, action key versions, the whole 9 yards, but never do we get any other nods to Scooby's essential musical past, not once. The closest we get to anything resembling a mirror of the show's musical identity is this weird, swanky, wannabe big band song over the monster chase sequence, and the Hellblade theme park demon song that gets stuck in my head sometimes. Where's the clue-searching music? What about the new Scooby-Doo show theme, which is equally as recognizable? Scrappy's the main bad guy, nobody thought to twist around the music from his own show to reflect that? In place of these classic nods to Scooby's musical past, we get a bland Hollywood orchestra without a hint of style or personality. The result is that the speakers are bereft and jealous of what the screen gifts to the audience. What little can be found within lies nested in however many times David Newman can shift the only melodies ever heard around into different contexts. It's cool, I guess, but it isn't nearly enough, and the context in which it disappoints just breeds more disappointment. It's an overt blemish for a movie whose face is so intently reliant on clearly executed reverence for its source, in both construction and writing. Luckily for us, that latter point extends to clue number 4, those meddling kids. We talked about the awkward dance people have to put on during instances of adaptation, and this extends well beyond Gunn and through other parties, namely Linda Cardellini, Matthew Lillard, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Sarah Michelle Gellar as Mystery Incorporated. After all, what's a god king like Gunn's CGI Scooby-Doo without his loyal subjects? Maybe it's the nostalgic dopamine hit, but there's something about seeing the gang brought to life with near pinpoint accuracy to character design, which explains a lot about the 400 or so other casting credits attached to Mary Verneux's name, that hits the right spot for me. A well-intentioned and respectful amount of detail is placed in updating the look to reflect the times. much like the cartoons the movie sources from. The movie's doubly benefited in this way since operating on its own cartoony logic allows for a more dissecting focus on the iconography of each member of the gang. They're the gang as we know them, but visually distilled to their essence and reflected back at the audience in parody. It's a green v-neck, a red ascot, a purple headband, and an orange sweater with a pair of glasses. It's Mystery Inc. come to life. Applause for casting and costume aside, there's more to be said of the cast proper. There's a comparison to be made of the way the monsters adopt cheesy 2000s speak.
Are you tricking on me?
And what the cast brings to each character, but it's more nuanced than that. Matthew Lillard has kind of become the poster child for casting in this vein in the 2 decades since release, so much so that he's been passed down the Shaggy sandwich from Casey Kasem himself. It's a portrayal on par with the best in terms of embodying an adapted character on screen. Bedfellows with the likes of Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent and Christopher Lee's Dracula, and synonymous with Shaggy's own ubiquity as a pop cultural icon. Matthew Lillard's uncanny resemblance to, and irrefutable reverence for, the person he's playing is evident in every single second of his time on screen. Even more importantly, most of these seconds are spent acting in isolation. Unless your name's Andy Serkis or Ahmed Best, you probably aren't doing mocap or CGI characters in 2002. And unless your name's Matthew Lillard, you probably aren't spending the majority of production talking to, reacting to, and moving around a cartoonishly expressive, computer-generated anthropomorphic Great Dane. Sure, you've got a couple of precursors, Stuart Little, Dino in the Flintstones, Jar Jar Binks and Gollum come to mind, but those are a tiny boy with mousy features, Jim Henson, George Lucas, and Peter Jackson. Sure, Gunn and crew have got that Hanna-Barbera and WB fuck money, but Raja Gosnell directed Home Alone 3, and he was fresh off Big Mama's house at the time, and both the action and direction dictate more than, pretend you're holding a little mouse boy. No shade to Stewart. The man's going goblin mode. He's carrying around, chasing after, falling over, getting hit by, and attempting to hit a CGI render of an insane cartoon Great Dane. It's impressive in itself. Lillard's instincts as an actor are almost always spot on. So much so that he was able to levy this role not only into continued work as the character, but also transitioned into a fully accomplished voice actor in his own right. He shines in his first adventure aboard the Norval Express, nailing the voice while sounding natural, and bringing to life all the essential tenets of the Shagster. His take is a little more energy to him when compared to classic Shaggy, but it suits a 2-hour movie which offers Lillard a chance to show off each side of the character. As discussed, his interactions with Scooby are great on the whole. There might be a misplaced eyeline here or there, but he also convincingly sells trying to catch a Scooby snack in the air before Scooby, so it's largely a moot point. His physicality in the role is especially commendable, as he exaggerates his limbs and converts his length into cartoonish dives down holes in the ground. His commitment to Scooby and their friendship also comes across great here. Lillard's able to convincingly cover some of the quicker moving ground in terms of plot, thanks to tapping into the heart of the character. The script puts that heart front and center for Shaggy, and Matthew Lillard bakes that idea into the performance. This is exhibited in some of the more involved moments with Scooby, like when they hold a regrettable fart contest, or that their entire beat boils down to Shaggy asking who Scooby's best friend is. It's well crafted and well delivered. The other members of the gang fare nearly as well, though I could understand some debate around their iconic status, with the exception of Linda Cardellini as Velma.
I'm not hot. Me neither.
Velma probably suffers the most from cut context in the movie proper, but Cardellini is so one-to-one evocative of the things that make the character work, you'd be forgiven for overlooking it. Once again, the recreation of her design in live action is fully realized. She and Daphne are both victims of third-act cleavage exploitation, but she's also the smart girl, so violations of her modesty get toned down by comparison. The misgivings of looking back at a 20-year-old movie aside, Velma gets a lot to do here. Her role as the gang's chief clue expert and brainiac are preserved, and Cardellini knowingly delivers on the script with a sardonic wit and shades of a superiority complex. These two attributes in specific would go on to help redefine Velma in a lot of Scooby media moving forward, most notably Mystery Incorporated. But the movie's interpretation is a little more vulnerable and nuanced. It pairs well with the way that Fred serves as a secondary antagonist toward Velma, setting an anchor point for the audience to attach themselves to as she moves through some of her less desirable traits. Like Matthew Lillard, Linda Cardellini's voice is spot on relative to more modern portrayals of Velma, fittingly so considering she's somewhat providing the template here.
In fact, Scrappy Cornelius Dew, who sadly was corrupted by the power of the Daemon Ritus.
Velma's own vocal characteristics evolved over about a decade from her first incarnation, as shaped by Nicole Jaffe and Pat Stevens, resulting in less clearly definable vocal tics and habits. What was developed in terms of Velma's distinctions, her nasal cadence and inquisitive rhythm, are codified here by Cardellini. She's imbued with a nerdy charm, but it isn't bog standard. Like Matthew Lillard, Linda Cardellini is able to garnish Velma with tasteful doses of believability, and her character moves a little closer to the ground as a result. Once again, fitting, considering her role as the resident skeptic. Fred and Daphne probably shine the least out of the main cast, Fred more so, but traits like scared and smart are easier to adapt than leader and girl. As a result, both tend to lean a little more into Gunn's parodic slant. This happens more with Fred, so let's focus on him first. The fun part about having somewhat loosely defined character traits is that you get to fuck around a bit, and that spirit's a good fit for Freddie Prinze Jr.'s charismatic scenery chewing. He gets the funniest moments of the movie thanks directly to his delivery, too.
Mr. Mononucleosis?
Yes.
And if you're on the right side of Gunn Road, his turn as Monster Fred oozes with the kind of kitschy charm only a movie like this can deliver. His pretty boy charms do a good job of selling his arrogant sensibilities, too. He's still a likable guy, 2000's Grove joke notwithstanding. The key here is that secret mix between his sense of humor, his willingness to change, and that he's often the butt of the joke. FPJ gets to rest on his laurels a bit, but it's done with a self-aware wink. If any of the cast is in symbiosis with Gunn's metatextual liberties, it's certainly Freddie Prinze Jr.'s Fred. It's hard to think of anybody that could pass as a dead ringer for Fred, especially without his iconic white sweater and ascot. But enough of his iconography is preserved, if in muted ways, in order for him to be recognizable. A blue jacket, a buried neckpiece, bleach blonde hair. That he uses and exaggerates his own speaking voice rather than impersonating the admittedly inimitable Frank Welker is also indicative of this. It isn't necessarily a bad thing, since the movie is able to strike the balance, but the net result lies more with the abject existence of a movie Fred, as opposed to more universal portrayals given to Shaggy and Velma. What remains beneath is that the movie doesn't work without him. Finally, we have Sarah Michelle Gellar as Daphne. Classically, Daphne comes across as a little more vague than Fred in terms of overall characterization. She gets to be the girl. A human MacGuffin used to advance the plot and look pretty doing it. I don't think it's true that she gets captured as many times as Gunn insists she does, but I do think her vague personality, especially in Where Are You?, naturally slots in as something easier to plot around than the other kids. This would also lend Daphne a unique utility in the makeup of the group, and that's probably why she got to tag along with Shag, Scoob, and Scrappy through the 80s, while Velma and Fred sat on the bench until a pup named Scooby-Doo. Daphne's amenable to all newcomers. Sure, she may not be as smart as Velma, but who needs to be when the person you need to be smarter than is Scrappy-Doo? She may not be as capable as Fred, but she can still be responsible and leaderly compared to Flim Flam. Sarah Michelle Gellar's take on the character is pretty similar to Fred because of this, with an extra dollop of metatextual meaning. She's movie Daphne, and similarly to Linda Cardellini and her future husband Freddie Prinze Jr., she gets to leave her own indelible mark on the character which would come to define Daphne moving forward. Appearance-wise, it's also similar to Fred's situation. You get some red hair, purple accessories, a splash of green in there, and there she is. Gellar's performance as Daphne is informed by a few things pretty equally. Gellar's own status as a badass vampire hunter on TV, Daphne's proclivity for fashion and getting captured, and a desire by Gunn to imbue her with a little bit more agency. It's not to say that these things were lacking in Daphne prior to the movie. She was able to kick some ass with a similar setup 2 years prior in Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. But these three things come together to let Gellar dig into what she does best. She's played quippy and overeager, and it works for the story Gunn's telling. Geller also plays up the dits a little bit, though in service of comedy. The bit with the voodoo guy at his house is pretty good.
Aha! You want me to go up to that castle,
Didn't you just hear what I said?
but you're scary.
Geller sells Daph's overconfidence with a funny charm, and it's fun to see her navigate these types of situations. She gets a big fight scene at the end, and while it's an exciting moment to cap off Daphne's growth with, it's only serviceable as far as action and fight scenes go. By the numbers isn't exactly the right way to describe it, but I could possibly concede that in the hands of a lesser actress. Still, Geller helps Daphne stick the landing as far as portrayal and characterization goes. She's got good humorous moments, a course of action to call her own, and the right skill set to sell it.
Straight up.
The cast in its entirety point to different polar extremes for Gunn, to the Republic of Universalis and the autocracy of authorial intent. What this means for the movie, ultimately, is that its characters are left in a weird space between being transcendental and being 2002's own cultural assessment of Scooby-Doo as franchised. It's a space almost exclusively occupied by the adaptable. On the whole, I like most of the decisions made here. There's a consideration and respect that's felt in the development and performance of each of the main cast, even if the script's witticisms and criticisms toward them sometimes miss the mark. It's a difficult climb up to, and even further fall from, here to something like Rosie O'Donnell as Betty Rubble. There's a reciprocal appreciation for the characters between Gunn and his audience, both well considered by the script and actors, and the movie ensures, in turn, that all parties involved get to enjoy their own box of... Clue number 5. Scooby Snacks. This video was originally supposed to look at 5 different live-action adaptations of classic cartoons: Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas, and Josie and the Pussycats. The goal was to focus on live-action adaptations that don't center around CG characters, like Yogi Bear, the Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and the like, to open them up and see how they tick. And I made it all the way through the Flintstones before I started to retool the idea, and then I started writing, and then I whittled it down to just the original Scooby. Now I'm here, however long this is into the video, at least 12 hours sank into watching Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Doo 2 and the Flintstones, and I still have some shit to say. When I tell you that I want to crawl through my screen and start a new life as a mailman in Bedrock Summer 94, I fucking mean it. The advent of wholesale environmental CGI is a game changer in the world of production design, but no matter how good it gets, no matter how photorealistic, its employment is forever subject to its greatest limitation, each and every time. The actors can't touch it. If I could stand on my boomer box for just a second, there's something of a lost art to production design and direction under the mass adoption of computer-generated sets. It takes ingenuity and clever workarounds to build Bedrock from the ground up. Even if it's a little theme parky, that's part of the appeal. If Scooby-Doo and Attack of the Clones have a point of intersection for me, it's that I'd much rather watch a CGI dog skate on a real factory ramp than watch a real man jump across a CGI factory ramp. Scooby's production design in this regard shows up in bursts. The more islandish aspects of Spooky Island aren't too impressive. It comes across a bit like a cheap MTV Spring Break imitation. Where the production elements really shine are in the more classic Scooby backdrops, specifically the Spooky Island castle. Part of the treat is in the translation. What does Bedrock look like? Does it feel like its source? Well, Spooky Island Castle feels exactly like its source, and that the execution matches the intention makes all the time spent there feel like it's firing on all cylinders. That it fits so snugly with the tools of the trauma trade is the cherry on top. Lavish gothic living rooms, the trauma wall, booby-trapped hallways, a secret chamber, a secret lab, and paintings with the eyes cut out. It's an absolute treat, save for the criminally underutilized Scooby music catalog. The movie's secondary characters are fine. They don't really get enough screen time to sway me either way. I like the voodoo guy and his Arnuki beast. I find the luchador guy confusing. The bald shaman guy is somehow too hammy for the movie he's in. And Velma's boyfriend is bleeding out on the cutting room floor, but all around they're inoffensive. The same can be said of the plot writ large. It's not great, but I'm a fan of the things it's working in service of. That's kind of the linchpin for this movie on the whole, and it generously speaks to the spirit of adaptation it embodies. We're here to see the things the movie adapts, not what it doesn't, and that decision's left in the hands of James Gunn. What we're left with is an adaptation in the broad, but with an acute attention to detail. How ubiquitous is Scooby-Doo? About as ubiquitous as 4 kids, a dog, and a mystery to solve, so that's what we're given. It's the spirit of a 32, now 52-year-old franchise baked into the crust of a movie script and left overnight to see what rises. It's the presence of character arcs which stem directly from those characters reckoning with their own ubiquity. It's reckoning with the myths of long-runner American media at the dawn of a new millennium struggling to remain timeless. It's the spirit of Scooby-Doo. Hi everybody! Thank you for watching my video again. Yeah, what did you think about it? Did you think it was a good video? Was it bad? Do you think I repeated myself? I think I repeated myself. If you have any opinions about it, you can go ahead and leave them in the comment section, and you can like my channel and or like my video and subscribe to my channel if you feel like it. Yeah, moving forward, I think I have a couple ideas for videos I want to make moving down the timeline. I'm not sure how long it'll be. This one came out sooner than the last one did, so that's a sign of progress. I was actually supposed to have it out on the 14th, which was the 20-year anniversary of the Scooby-Doo movie coming out in North America, but I'm not good at this yet, so it didn't happen. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Take care.